what is continuous integration? Continuous integration, that's the concept where every time you check code into source control, guess what? It kicks off the build, compiles everything, makes sure everything is looking good. Now, part of that build, potentially you could go ahead and run a bunch of unit tests, right? So this is one way where we can help ensure quality. Anytime somebody checks their code in, it has to compile, right? It will kick off a build and immediately will try to compile out of your code. If it doesn't compile, the build fails, whoever checked in the code immediately gets notified. So then they can go in and fix it really, really quickly instead of waiting around until somebody actually notices that the code is broken. So continuous integration, a great concept. Everyone should be doing this by now.
Abel's got that right. Everybody should be doing this. And you're doing this. You're watching AzureFunBytes. My name's Jay Gordon. Welcome back. Welcome back. Thank you very much. I always appreciate that you, the viewer, are here with me every week. We get together. We have conversations about Microsoft Azure and how it all kind of comes together. The tools that build it, the foundation, the fundamentals. And that's why we're AzureFunBytes. So today, I brought a guest that you just kind of saw a little video of, who's going to help me talk a lot about a concept more than an actual technology. And so to join me in today's conversation, I've got none other than Abel Wang. Hey, Abel, how are you today?
Very good. How's it going, Jay?
You know, I am doing absolutely wonderful. I continue to enjoy doing this show. Even in the snowy weather we have here in the Northeast, I seem to kind of want to get up in the morning and run to this computer so that I can talk to people like yourself.
Very cool. Very cool.
And so how are things for you? You're also kind of, always working on something. I know you've got a lot going on in the next few weeks, and we'll talk about all that. But for now, I want to kind of remind everybody of a few things. This is a conversational show. You are taking part of this. Without you, I can't do this show. And so Abel and I are going to get together. We're going to have this conversation, but I need you to take part. So first of all, you can go to Learn TV. You can go right here and you can leave us a comment, a question. And I actually have a poll up right now. I want to know if you are using an Agile workflow already. If you are, and you feel like it's working for you, also leave it in the comments. If you're watching natively, say on YouTube or Twitch, any of these, I can see your comments. We'll get them up on screen. And so, Abel, I think it's time for you and I to kind of get into today's subject. And so while we showed the little video before about continuous integration, without actually process to help you get to the point of continuous integration, it seems a little perilous for me to kind of just throw code into stuff. What is your thought process on how like teams begin here?
Well, first of all, the topic is all about Agile today, right? And that's really where everything needs to start, right? Because we tend to want to just dive in and talk about DevOps. And when we talk about DevOps, we oftentimes think of CI/CD. Like you check in code, just got to build it, and hooray for that. But before you can even do CI/CD, you've got to be doing Agile correctly, right? So we probably first should figure out what exactly is Agile, right? Mm-hmm. So Agile is basically a software development process, right? It's a type of a way of how you write process or how you write software, and it is a highly iterative process, right? Where you do very short little sprints, short little bursts. And after you write your code, then you go ahead and start inspecting it. Look what you did, have reviews. And the reason why you want to have frequent inspections is now you can course correct if you're not building the software the way your end users really want it or need it, right? So this was a brand new way of building software, because the way we used to build things, and of course a lot of people still build it, is using a waterfall-based process. Right?
Yes. So just so everybody takes a look, this was kind of like a waterfall process here. You know, something that like takes all these different steps, but your release isn't going to come continuously. Like this is planning for just one big throw over the wall of code every so often. When did you see people kind of like moving away from Waterfall? What year did this kind of all start to come together, you think?
It came together pretty much when I first started joining the workforce, right? So this would be late 80s, early 90s. You started to hear rumblings, right? But the big thing that was happening is the way that we used to build software is kind of the way that we did manufacturing. So you got to think about how old software really is, right? So like in the 50s and 60s, right? They started building software and we didn't know any better. So we pretty much did it the way we did manufacturing. So first what we did, we sat there and we would spend months, maybe even years, gathering requirements, trying to figure out exactly what we wanted to build. And then we would spend a year or more building that, whatever it is that we wanted to build. And when we were done, hooray for that. That we should be perfect, right? And we should be able to look at our requirements and figure out exactly how long it was going to take to build the software or whatever, because that's how we did manufacturing. So you think about a car, right? How long does it take to build a Ford Mustang?
Sure.
I don't know.
Oh,
but you know what? If we talk to Ford, they can tell us down to the millisecond exactly how long it will take from the start of the assembly line all the way to when they like install the last bolt, right? They've done millions of these over and over and over again. Unfortunately, software is not like manufacturing, right? The biggest difference is we don't know how long it's going to take to write something, right? We're not doing the same thing over and over and over again, which make things really, really difficult, right? We have a really difficult time trying to predict how long it takes for us to do something. So the comparison that I like to draw is we're not building a car over and over and over again. What we're doing is we're designing a car completely from the ground up, a brand new design. How long does that take Ford or Porsche or BMW? Takes them a really long time if this is a brand new, completely, new design that they're doing, right? So
and I think about this all the time. This is the number one thing I think about constantly when it comes to this type of situation, and you bringing up that assembly line versus software development, is that the Toyota Kata method always comes up to mind. And for those who don't know, and I'll add this to stream, I'll put this in our chat room in just a second. But the Toyota Kata method, was about continuous improvement, and it kind of was the predecessor to a lot of these types of methods. And what's interesting is that when you talk to the people who are the innovators in DevOps early on, like a John Willis, his mention of like Toyota Kata and how that methodology really led into what we're seeing now in this like software development model methodology revolution, it really came into play. And so I'm curious, did you end up reading that book? I haven't yet. I really should.
Of course I have. I've done all of that, right? So I had to make the transition from Waterfall to Agile, right? To figure out, I mean, when I first started writing software, we all did things the Waterfall way. Agile wasn't even a thing. But what really got me going is even looking at my own experience, 90% of my software projects failed. You look across the industry, 90% of Waterfall projects fail. And of course, whenever I say this, people are like, no, it's not that much, but it really is. My definition of failing is we went over budget, we went over time, we would write a piece of software, it would have way too many bugs. We would end up writing a piece of software, the end users would start using it, and they'd be like, that's not what we want. Even if we followed the requirements to the T, right? Just follow it to the letter. You give it to the end users, they still start using it, and they're like, oh, that's not really what we want, right? So 90% of software projects using Waterfall failed. So there had to be a better way of doing this. And that's where Agile kind of came about, where they fully embraced the fact that, the weaknesses of doing something like in Waterfall. Number one, we don't know what it is that we want to build exactly. So why don't we build it in small chunks, review it with the end users, so then we can course correct really quickly, right? And we do this over and over and over again. This was kind of a revolutionary idea, right? Because all of a sudden, all the old metrics that our product managers or project managers wanted to use, they don't make sense anymore. The same metrics that you want to use in a waterfall project, completely different than the metrics that you want in an agile project. They just don't match up. So this was a huge shift that a lot of companies needed to figure out. And even to this day, people are still making that transformation, going from waterfall to agile.
Sure. And so let me just kind of make an adjustment here. And so this is something that I always think back to. It's amazing to me how revolutions begin sometimes with just saying out loud what you're thinking in our industry. I think back to like the what was it, like 10,000 whatever, the number of releases in a day that we saw released a couple in that one of those early DevOps days talks about all the different releases and how that kind of made a change. And it was basically someone finally saying, look, we don't need to release just once a day. We're going to release, or once a month or once a year. We're going to release continuously, and we're going to improve our process throughout that continuous creation of new features, delivering those new features, taking information that we get from releasing those new features and using that to further the process. And so I'd love to talk a little bit about this. And so I'm going to just read this straight up. The Manifesto for Agile Software Development. Simply, we are uncovering better ways of developing software by doing it and helping others to do it. Through this work, we have come to value individuals and interactions over processes and tools. Abel, I feel like that first one, the individuals and interactions, is almost like what we think about the basis of DevOps in general. People help create process and procedures and tools. And so if we kind of focus on what people are able to bring to the table, we're able to kind of quantify it a little bit more in the things we do.
So here's the big thing, right? Unfortunately, when you start looking at upper management, what they always want to do is they want to solve the problem by buying something, right? Mm-hmm. What tools do I need? I buy it and then it's fixed. We need DevOps. How do I buy DevOps? We need Agile. How do I buy Agile? Unfortunately, you can't do that, right? It's not really about the tooling. It is about the people. It is about the interaction. It is about the cooperation.
Sure. So working software over comprehensive documentation. It sounds pretty straightforward, but how do you kind of define that one principle of this?
So look, we all get it, right? You can get a page full of requirements and docs, and you can follow it to the letter. How easy is it to understand that page full of docs with all their diagrams and flow charts and all that nonsense? Or would you rather just have a prototype that you can start clicking away on, and then you can be like, ooh, you know what? I really wish this was a list box instead of a tree control. And I really wish it was on the right-hand side because of XYZ. It is much easier to actually work with the software as opposed to reading a document. I think my best example is when you ask for feedback, if I hand 10 people a document and say, give me feedback on it, I'm barely going to get any feedback whatsoever. But if I hand them working software and I say, give me feedback, and they have to use it on a daily basis, if it's causing them any type of pain, I'm going to get so much feedback from them, right?
Yeah.
So yeah, working software is so much nicer than a pile full of docs.
It seems like one of the big reasons why people prefer a spec, in your docs for how you're going to use code. Like that in itself, while it's great documentation, it's functional. And having like specs and examples within a repository, to me, it's kind of like the same thing. It's like, if you bring something to me that works, it's a whole lot more interesting and easier for me to grok what it is you want me to do by going ahead and actually just understanding everything and using it. So I'm a do person. You know what I mean? So I can read your docs all day long, but if you give me something to actually do and that I can see it works, then it's going to make a whole lot more sense to me. And then I can build documentation off what you've run. So while documentation is always important, it's got to work, right?
Documentation is absolutely vital. And again, remember where this is coming from. From the manufacturing world, you need to have extensive docs so you can make sure you manufacture exactly what you want. The problem
Mm-hmm.
when you try to apply those same principles to software is people don't really realize what it is that they really want until they start clicking on the screen or touching their phones or whatever, right? That's really when we start figuring out, oh, I thought I really wanted it this way, but now that I'm using it, I really want it this way, right? That's why it's
Mm.
so important to have working software versus just a document.
So let's talk about this next one.
Mhm.
Customer collaboration over contract negotiation. I feel like for people who have worked as engineers, this is kind of like our saving grace. Because I feel like sales teams dominated the conversation for so long. I know I did a lot of sales driven development and ops, which, when I say sales driven, salespeople come up with an idea of how something's going to happen and they sell it, and you just kind of figure it out, and see how much money somebody saved in the process of getting something done. But let's be honest, Abel, if you're considered with the first thing being cost over what the customer is going to get, I feel like you're going to be sticking yourself in a very deep hole, and not really thinking about things long term.
Yeah, this principle right here, it really falls back down to the principles of we don't really quite know what it is that we want,
Mm-hmm.
and we don't quite know how long it's going to take to do that, right? And I get it. Nobody wants to admit that because people just want to be able to say, hey, I want to spend X amount of dollars to get this piece of software, right? That's what we all want. That's the holy grail. But the whole point of Agile is you got to admit we can't do that because we don't quite know what it is that we want to build and we don't know how long it's going to take. Once you can fully admit that, then you can start working with the customer, collaborating with them, working towards what it is that you want versus, oh, you wrote a spec that says you want it this way, so we're going to do it this way, and you're going to pay for it, and you're going to love it, even though when you start using it, you're like, this isn't what we want, right? So again, this is a very different approach to writing software than how we used to do things in the 80s and 90s.
Sure. And so this one, the responding to change over following a plan. What do they say? We make these wonderful plans, in life and in general. We have an idea of like what March of 2020 was going to look like. But when reality set in and we realized what March of 2020 was like, we all had to kind of adjust rather than follow our plan. I know, Abel, you and I were supposed to go all over the world. We were supposed to do all these different things. We're supposed to meet people. And maybe that's our development of what we're building right now, as opposed to software. We're building these communities, we're building information to people. But our plan changed. But that's okay.
Plans change all the time. And again, remember, let's go back to the same principles that I've been talking about. When you talk about Agile, you have to admit we don't know what it is that we want built. We think we do, but we don't. So as soon as we start using it, the customer is going to start telling us, oh, I know we said we wanted it this way, but once I start using it, I kind of don't. I kind of really want to do things like this. And as an Agile team, you have to be able to respond to that. You can't just stick to the plan, stick to that initial specifications that were written.
Got it. So, we got one more thing that we're going to hit. And
Sure.
I'd love to get your kind of, insight into this line. Because I feel like we talk a lot about, in security, they talk a lot about pushing left. But let's get your insight. That is, while there is a value in the items on the right, which I believe is completed, we value items on the left more, which I believe is that work in progress or incomplete work. But maybe you can better define that for me.
Well, if you look at it that way, right? On the right-hand side, that's work that's already been done. And the work on the left is things that need to be done. Why is that so important? It's because that's what our customers, those are the things that they still want, and that's what they still need, right? Those are the things that we should be addressing. And here's the thing, as time goes on, that's going to change for the customer. And so that shouldn't be set in stone. they should have the ability to come in here, reprioritize what they want, reprioritize what is most important for them so that we can get what is most important out into production for them. That right there is a major principle of Agile.
Makes sense. And so I want everybody to remember, while we've got this time with Abel, please make the best use of it. He's a busy dude. And so I'm really happy that I got this time. So if you got a question, you can see right there, please send them here, put them in the chat, put them in our Learn TV chat, either place. And remember, we got a poll going. Make sure you hit aka.ms/learntv and go ahead, check out that poll. Anyway, Abel, I think we're going to kind of move to our next piece and really talk about, I suppose, what it is and what Agile isn't. Mm-hmm. And so it gives two real big ideas here, is that one, it's not cowboy coding. And I remember those days where it's like you wing it. You know what I mean?
Agile, yeah, everyone wants to think that, right? When you first hear Agile, everyone first thinks that means, oh, you have no plan, you're Agile, you just do whatever you want and go as fast as you possibly can. And nothing can be further from the truth, right? Agile is actually a very prescribed process. Whether you're doing Kanban or whether you're doing Scrum or whether you're doing Agile with a capital A, there is a very, very distinct process that you have to go through. There is a series of steps that you have to go to. Now, me personally, I'm a huge fan of Scrum, right? Scrum is extremely prescribed, where step by step, you have to do things exactly a certain way, or you're not doing Scrum, right? I've led many Scrum teams very, very successfully, and I'm a Scrum purist, so I do things by the book. And again, it is definitely not cowboy coding where you do whatever you want. The whole point of Agile is it's a different type of process, but it is a process, and that process is set in stone.
That really leads to the next kind of fundamental that we get here, is that Agile is not without rigor and planning. On the contrary, Agile methodologies practice typically emphasize discipline and planning. And that makes a ton of sense to me, Abel, because we're talking about organized chaos. That's kind of what I see here. Am I going on the right path here with the idea of like organized chaos?
It is, right. I like that. I like that statement a lot, Jay, because it's like trying to build software is chaos, because the target always changes. We don't know how long it takes for us to build something. Building quality into an application is extremely difficult. It is chaos. But that's why Agile came about, right? The whole point is we can boil down the process of Agile, whether it's Kanban, whether it's Scrum, whether it's Agile with a capital A, extreme programming, whatever you want, right? In a nutshell, the way that you do Agile is the first thing you got to realize is you're going to build your product incremental in small chunks. So you need to pick an iteration length. It can be 4 weeks, it can be 3 weeks, 2 weeks, all the way down to a week. So somewhere usually between 1 week to 4 weeks. Anything more than 4 weeks, the iteration is just a little too long, and you don't get that feedback to be able to course correct well. Anything shorter than a week, oh my goodness, you're just not going to be able to get enough things done, right? So it needs to be somewhere in between there, and it just needs to make sense for your team. So you have these short iterations, and then you have something called a backlog. What's a backlog? A backlog is a wish list of everything that you want for your product, right? Doesn't mean everything on the backlog gets built. This is just everything that you want on there. So you get an idea, you throw it on there. You get an idea, throw it on there. Somebody else gets an idea, throw it on the backlog, right? But then you'll have somebody, a product owner, somebody that has stake in the product, someone that can decide what it is the product should do. The product owner will then look at this product backlog and prioritize it and say, which one of all these ideas is most important? And then that's when the team, the dev team, can look at this prioritized list, start from the top, work their way to the bottom, right? And they'll look at it and be like, great, from this prioritized list, I think we can do the top 3 items. I think we can get it done. So let's commit to it. For the next sprint or for the next iteration, let's do those first 3. They work on it. They're done with it. At the end of their sprint, hopefully they'll deploy to production, but that starts going into DevOps. We'll touch on that later. But at the end, they should demonstrate this to the product owner and say, look, you wanted these 3 user stories or backlog items or whatever you want to call them. You said they're the most important. We got them done. Look what we did. And the product owner can then look at it and be like, oh, that is exactly what I wanted. Hooray for that. Then he reprioritizes that backlog, right? He can look at the list and say, oh, I thought I wanted the other 3 things next, but now that I've seen these 3 things, maybe I want some other stuff more important. Or maybe he'll look at the 3 things that you created and be like, ooh, that's not what I wanted at all.
Sure.
So let's course correct. Let's fix that, right? So instead of wasting months and months and months and months of time, within one sprint, you can course correct and start fixing things. But then this same process just rinse and repeats itself over and over and over again. So it works well.
So that leads me to what this kind of main idea is here, is that it's not an excuse for no roadmap. It sounds like what you're doing is, like I said, and we're talked about this organized chaos. We've got to have a vision of where our project's going, even when our plans change.
Yeah. So the important thing is teams absolutely know where they're going. From one sprint to the next sprint, my dev teams 100% know what they're supposed to do. Why? Because we have a product backlog, and that backlog has been prioritized by our product owner. So we know what's most important. And you know what? The most important item will be built first. Now, this is a really important concept for Agile, right? Especially for teams that are coming from Waterfall. When I first ask a team that's coming from Waterfall and I asked a product owner, what's the most important thing on your backlog? And they'll look at it and they'll tell me everything. And I'm like, no, it can't be everything. So here's the thing. Not everything on your backlog is going to make it into production. In a Waterfall world, they get to say that, right? This is everything that I want. It's in my spec, and I'm going to get that in 3 weeks. Are you really going to get it in 3 weeks? Of course not, right? You're not going to get anywhere when you're done. You're going to go way off budget, off time, so on and so forth. But in the world of Agile, we don't pretend that everything on the backlog is going to make it to the final production. So what we tell people is we tell them the truth. This is your list of stuff that you want. Not everything potentially will make it into production. So you tell me what's most important so I can get what's most important into production.
Absolutely. So now we're going to move on to this next page, which I think is also pretty useful because it defines Agile development, which I think is so the idea of Agile is I guess is more of a project management methodology. You can tell me if I'm thinking about that wrong. But I think of Agile, it's a management process, and then development is a subsect of that giant management process. You can let me know if I'm wrong.
Yeah, that works. That works. And for me, what do I care about? I care about Agile development, right? Because I'm a dev. I run dev teams. So yeah, we're all about Agile development.
Absolutely. And so that comes with what you talked about before. It's that backlog. It's these things that we've kind of thought about that we want done. And I like to think about what you were talking about is like everything's important. Look, when you go grocery shopping, not everything on your list is the most important thing. You could probably get away with, not getting that extra bag of potato chips, even though it's on your list. It's a really cool idea. You may want the Lay's and get the Ruffles, but the idea is that you need to sometimes make a decision on what's more of a priority based on what you need. And so it's great to have this idea of what we want. We want to eat all the chips we can. We want to we want to snack on all the treats we have. But the idea is that we're not always going to get that opportunity, and it requires us to kind of plan a little bit more.
Yeah. So again, Agile is not just cowboy dev, right? It is a very, very process intensive, prescribed process. I can't say it in any other way. It is actually a very heavy process where you have to follow the steps very, very carefully, one step after another after another. And done correctly, it is beautiful, right? Done correctly, next thing you know, sprint after sprint, you start delivering the chunks of software that you said you're going to. And at the end of every sprint, if you're doing it correctly, you are going to have software that you can demonstrate sprint after sprint after sprint. And when at the end of your sprint, you do demonstrate it. so that your end users or your product owner can look at it and give you the feedback. So if you do need course correction, because in software, remember, we don't quite know what it is that we want until we see it running.
Mhm.
That's when you get that frequent course correction.
So everybody, if you want to know about a lot of these concepts, these tools, these ideas, there's this really great page in the Azure documentation. It's right here. It's a glossary, and I feel we need to define a lot of these big ideas that we've started talking about, Abel. And so the next one I kind of would love you to kind of have a little bit more in depth on is Scrum. You mentioned it before. And so I'd like you to kind of give me like how does Scrum fit into all of this now?
So Scrum is a agile software development process, right? There are a lot of different software development processes out there that are agile, right? And Scrum is just one flavor of it. Happens to be my favorite flavor, but again, it is a very process intensive software development process, right? So in Scrum, there are rules to how it needs to be run. So there's the idea that in Scrum, you have rituals, right? And these rituals, you have to run them every single iteration, no matter what. And the first one is you need to have a daily stand-up where every single day, the dev team gets together and they list three things. What am I working on, or what have I been working on? What am I going to be working on next? And are there any blockers? And that's it. Right? A lot of people are like, oh, a daily stand-up, then we should go into depth and talk about things really a lot and blah, blah, blah. No. A daily stand-up should never be more than 15 minutes. If you have an hour-long daily stand-up, guess what? You're doing it wrong. It's just three things. This is what I did yesterday. This is what I plan on working today. And if I have blockers, these are my blockers. And if I have blockers and someone else says, oh, I can help you with that, you take that offline. You don't discuss it right then and there, right? That's all the daily stand-up is for. So that is one important ritual that needs to happen. The next,
absolutely.
Yeah, go ahead.
Oh no, I was going to say the one thing I've noticed is if you have a stand-up and you're talking mostly about things that don't have to do with your projects, it ends up just being a social hour, and I think that that's detrimental to the reasoning, because like you look at this whole image that we have here of like all the different steps that we have to go through, from the backlog to the planning. And if we need to actually get into something important and we're sitting around and we're talking about our pets, we're going to have a hard time actually focusing on what it is, what we need to accomplish. And so I think that that's the one thing I'm getting out of this whole process provides focus for our team.
100% focus. And again, you cannot skip any of these rituals. No matter how much you want to, guess what? You have to do this. Now, at the end of your sprint, you need to have something called a sprint review. What's a sprint review? That's where you show what you have done to the product owner. And the product owner from there can give you feedback. And also, based off of your sprint review, the product owner can look at that product backlog and reprioritize that as well. Again, an important step that you cannot skip. And if you happen to mess up really badly and you have nothing to show, well, guess what? You still need to have that sprint review meeting, and you need to stand in front of everybody, including the product owner, and say, yep, we don't have anything to show because we messed up. Guess what? Because you have nothing to show does not mean you can skip the product or the sprint review.
And it's pretty crazy because, like most other big ideas around managing software and software development, there's even a certification, a role. And so I want to just talk for a second about the roles that we kind of need to have part of this whole process. And so I'll start by asking, there are these roles that we see in here. We can start obviously with the product owner. Do you see that?
Yeah, I'll just jump in, right? In the world of Scrum, there's only three roles. Only three, right? You've got a product owner. So the product owner has really only has one job to do, and that is to prioritize that backlog. That's their only job, is to prioritize that backlog. So what that means, the product owner's that role is a very, very important role. This needs to be somebody on the customer side who has enough skin in the game where if the product turns out not the way it needs to be, they're going to be hurting really badly, right? They need to have enough skin in the game to want that product to turn out the right way. Now, especially if you're coming from a waterfall world, oftentimes it's hard to find someone to be the product owner. But here's the thing that I tell people when they make that transition. If we cannot find a product owner from the customer side, clearly this product that we're trying to build is not important enough. So why are we wasting our time? If there's nobody in the customer side that's willing to be a product owner and has enough skin in the game to show up in a meeting, an hour meeting, once an iteration, why are we building the software then? Let's find a product. Let's find a customer that does want to commit, right? So the product owner role is really, really important, but they have one role to do. That's to prioritize that backlog.
So that would be kind of like in a idea of a company, maybe like the project manager, maybe acting also as a product owner. It could be another software developer that's got a concern. I mean, what role do you think typically in a company would be that product owner? Is there anyone specific or?
No, right? Again, right? You're trying to map the waterfall roles to an agile roles, and they don't map at all. They're two very, very different things. A program manager is completely, or a product manager is completely different from a product owner, right? So, okay, so it kind of depends. If you are building software, a lot of customers that we have, they've got a dev team that's working that will do software for different business units within an enterprise, right? If that's the case, whatever project that I'm working on, I'm building it for a business unit. That particular business unit, somebody from that business unit needs to be the product owner because we're building that software for them. Or maybe we're a consulting company and they've contracted us to go ahead and build software for XYZ, for some other company. Then somebody from that other company needs to be the product owner because we're building the software for them, right? So at Microsoft, we build a lot of software for the general public. Think of something like Office, right? Or we'll drill down even further. Think of a product like Word.
Sure.
How are we supposed to go to the general public in the entire world and find somebody that can represent and be a product owner? We can't, right? So what we have is what we call program managers. These program managers, they are the ones that are supposed to figure out. So they do all the interviewing. They interview all the customers. They do the customer feedbacks. They figure out what it is they think customers want. And then they are the ones that prioritize that backlog. So they act as the representation to the public. However, again, this is because we have to, because of the type of software that we're building. But if I'm building software for a business unit, somebody from that business unit needs to be the product owner. If I'm building it for another company, someone from the other company, they need to be that product owner. A couple of years ago, before I joined Microsoft, I was building medical software for a giant medical, group of some sort. This was in Tampa Bay. We were building software for like 5 different hospitals. They are all linked together, right? But the big thing was who's supposed to be our product owner. We originally had some admins that were some hospital admins that would act as our product owner, but we very quickly found out they didn't really know what it is the doctors really wanted because the people using our software were doctors. So finally, we're like, who the right people would be is a doctor that would be using our software. That's who the right product owner is. So we finally found a doctor that was going to be the product owner. And all of a sudden, we started building software that they wanted versus software that an admin thought that they wanted, but doctors really didn't care about the features they were picking, right? So picking the right product owner is incredibly important.
Okay, so now we talk about the Scrum Master.
Yep.
So I believe you've been a Scrum Master, is that correct?
All the time. Scrum Master only has 2 roles, right? Their role is to make sure that the team is following Scrum best practices. That's their most important role. Their other role that they have is they remove impediments for the team. So if the team has something blocking them, the Scrum Master can go out there, kick down the walls, and try to unblock them. That's their only 2 roles. So I constantly run into companies, right? They're making the transformation from Waterfall to Agile. And so they just take a project manager and they're like, oh, the project manager should be the Scrum Master. And I'm like, nope, that is one of the worst things you can do. Because how well does a project manager know Scrum? Oh, he went to a class. Great. That's fine. How well does a project manager know Scrum? Not that well. Then how can he or she make sure that the team is following Scrum best practices, right? So the role of a Scrum Master is a very, very thankless role, because you do need to go in there and basically kick your dev team's butts to make sure that they follow the best practices, Scrum best practices. And if they don't, you need to drop the hammer on them. So a lot of times you're dealing with developers that have 30 years of work experience. They look at you and they're like, why should I listen to you? I've been doing it this way for all my life. I'm very successful. I make X amount of money. Why should I listen to you? Right? And I'm really, really high ranked. Sorry, the Scrum Master's job is to drop the hammer on them if they're not doing things in terms of like Scrum best practices. So you need to have someone that has the will, has the clout to be able to do that. Also, the Scrum Master's job is to stop and unblock any impediments that the team has. So oftentimes they have to go and deal with other people within the organization, within the companies, all the way up to CVPs or even CEOs to say, no, you cannot ask my dev teams to do that because that breaks Scrum best practices as well. We are a Scrum shop. This is what we're doing, and this is the right way to do things. So
sure, keep sales out, keep management out. Let's make sure, or I should say upper management, let them go through proper channels, if you will. Don't go directly to your software engineers. It reminds me a lot of the Phoenix Project. And I think a lot of us think back to that when we talk about Agile and we talk about DevOps. And the big thing that you get from it are the conversations about sprints. And so, Abel, what do sprints and sprint planning, where does that really fit in here? How does that change the game?
The sprint's just an iteration, right? So when you decide you're going to go Agile, you need to decide how long are your iterations going to be. Is it going to be 1 week, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks? Somewhere between 1 and 4. I happen to love 2-week sprints because I feel like that's fast enough where we can get lots of feedback and course correct really quickly, long enough where I can get enough dev done where I feel like I'm very productive, right? I've been on teams where we have 1-week sprints. Those are fast, right? Now, granted, we commit to a lot less work. You can still be highly productive. It really doesn't matter what the sprint length is. It depends on the team that you're in and what works for that specific team. Right. I will just say that if you do your sprints correctly, from one sprint to the next sprint, you should always feel busy, but you should never feel overwhelmed, right? That if you're just, constantly busy, but not overwhelmed, then you're doing things right. If you do start feeling overwhelmed, that's a great sign that you're doing Agile incorrectly, right? You're taking on way too much work. So maybe next sprint, take on less work.
So that brings us into the board. And so, Abel, you and I have a board. Mm-hmm. That's the great thing is that you and I, we work off some of these same principles, even though we're using it to kind of make a decision on when content's happening, how it's going to happen. And so we use this process, but in software development, it kind of remains the same. And this is like a great example of how boards are kind of, and specifically Kanban boards are organized. And so I'll ask you, how does that backlog start to begin here? How do you start prioritizing? I mean, you said not everything is important, but as the Scrum Master, how are you prioritizing what's important?
Scrum Master does not prioritize that backlog, right?
That the product owner?
The product owner prioritizes it. So a backlog is just an ordered list. So no matter what type of tooling you use, or if you happen to use sticky notes, literally your backlog is a list of all the stuff that you want done, right? Or you think you want done. The product owner needs to come up there and then prioritize it. So the most important thing goes to the top, least important things falls to the bottom. And oftentimes, you don't even need to prioritize the entire backlog. You just need to prioritize enough for at least 1.5 sprints maybe. And that's pretty much good enough. You just need to say these 10 items are the most important things that I think the software needs to have, because clearly within one sprint, we can't finish 10 items. So yeah, that's going to be plenty, right? So you don't need to prioritize the entire thing, but you do need to prioritize enough so that it's one sprint's worth and maybe a little bit more.
And so I love this image right here. I think it really gives us an idea of just like how we use a board, specifically a Kanban board, to kind of move us along. And
so you're talking about Kanban boards now. So that's kind of a separate beast. A backlog, remember, is an ordered list, right? So backlogs are great in terms of prioritizing, maybe even doing very, very rudimentary type of planning, right? But where backlogs fall down is showing visually work in progress. And that's where Kanban boards kind of come into play, because ultimately Kanban boards has a bunch of swim lanes, has a bunch of columns, and the columns basically are states of a work item. And as you're working on it, you just drag it across the board, right? So it shows you in a very visual representation of what work is happening and what work has finished and what work is still coming up.
Gotcha. And so ultimately, we're taking this all and we're using tools, right? And so there's tons of tools out there to start creating these boards to kind of break things into our sprints. And so obviously we here at Microsoft, we talk a lot about Azure DevOps. And then there's, of course, Jira. And Jira tends to be another really popular tool. And we can kind of take a look at this particular one. And so, Abel, would our to-do kind of be our backlog here? Or do you think this is just a different, like, work qualification? How do you kind of look at this particular board here, this example board?
So yes and no, right? This this kind of falls more in line with a Kanban board, which is fine, right? So yes, you can look at the to-do column as this is your backlog, or this is the backlog that's things to do. Yeah, look at it as your backlog. Hopefully somebody has prioritized it. And as team members start doing work, they can grab the topmost item and start working through them. There's a couple different ways of doing this. So like I said, Scrum is one process, right? It's highly prescribed, where you have the backlog, it's prioritized, and then you decide in your sprint, these 10 items or these 3 items, that's what we're going to be doing. In the world of Kanban is a different process. It's another type of agile process. It's a little bit different though, because instead of saying for this particular sprint, this is what I'm doing, what you do is when you are free and you can do something, you grab an item, probably the topmost item, and you drag it to the next column to say, you know what, we're going to be working on it. And now once I start working on it, now drag it over to the next column, right? When I'm finally done, I can drag it over to the done column. An idea inside of Kanban or a Kanban board is you don't want people trying or committing to too much work at one time. So they have what they call WIP limits within a column. So that's a work in progress limit, where you can say, you know what, you can have 3 work in progress, but you're not allowed to drag more items onto it until you finish an item and drag it onto the next column, right? So this tries to make sure you don't commit to too much work and then everything just turns into a mess.
And so it's funny to look at this, same idea that keeps coming up, which is that a lot of these ideas were originally built for manufacturing. I think like it's really funny like here to see those words directly. Kanban was also like Agile in general. It looks at ways of an assembly line building. And that's maybe what I look at this whole process. It's creating the before, the middle, and the after of an assembly line. How do we get what products do we want to build? How do we want to build them? How do they actually get built by our people?
Yeah. So assembly line, it's a great point, right? So the way we build software, when we started building software, we had to look at the way we built stuff. And what we knew how to build was manufacturing. So everything that we do in software kind of flows from how we do things in manufacturing. Unfortunately, though, there are some differences between manufacturing and also writing software. And that's why there's been so many different types of processes spring up. besides just using what we do in, say, like what Ford Motor Company does or what Toyota even does. Toyota is a great case, like you were saying before, because they tweaked their process to be a lot more agile than how a lot of the American companies were doing it, especially like the 50s, 60s, 70s. So it does get a little bit interesting there. But yes, we always map back to how we do things in manufacturing, and we're really good at manufacturing. We've had centuries of history of figuring out how to do things with manufacturing. But software is a much, much, much younger industry. So because of that, we're really not that very good at it, right? Even today, we're still not great at it, but we're a lot better than we are like 20 years ago.
Absolutely. So I love this flow that we see here. And you can tell me how important is this particular set, the third one, because we know what's new. We've kind of talked about that. So after we take something out of our backlog, we're bringing it into new work. This is our planning, and we would build this a part of our sprint. We'd say, hey, in 2 weeks, all these new items, these user stories, these work items, whatever the way we're going to, maybe some people call them tickets. It doesn't matter. These are the new items. These are the things we've made a decision to work on. And so once we actually do that, we move one of those items into development. But the part on the right that I want to talk about is testing and how testing fits into this. Can you give me just a quick, how does testing fit into this whole Agile structure?
Yep, I actually have issues with this picture. And I know this is from our doc page, but I'll tell you why. So the way we traditionally did testing, right, before we did Agile, is we'd write our software, and when we were done, we'd throw it over the fence to QA, and then they'd start doing end-to-end functional tests to find our bugs. They would find our bugs, and they'd find a mountain of our bugs, and we'd start burning down that mountain. We'd throw it over the fence again, right? So this was a very, very long process. If our sprints are 2 weeks long, and sprint after sprint after sprint, in theory, we should have no bugs at the end of the sprint. How are we supposed to do testing, right? Because end-to-end functional testing takes a really freaking long time to do. So when we started doing Agile, we had to learn, instead of trying to bolt quality on at the end, now we have to try to build quality into our application as we are writing our code. So we don't need to rely purely on end-to-end functional testing. Because again, end-to-end functional testing takes way, way, way too long. So how do you build quality into your application as you're writing it? You do things like unit testing. You do things like automated UI testing. You make sure when you write your code in a testable manner, right? So it really, when I went from Waterfall to Agile, when I had to figure out how to build quality into my application, I literally had to take classes, and it changed the way that I wrote my code completely. Right? Because your code has to be written in a testable manner so that your unit tests actually make sense and can test your code, right? So where does testing happen? It happens at the same time that you're writing your code, right? Which is why I don't like the dev column and the testing column, because now the dev and the testing column should kind of just be one giant column now.
Gotcha. And so I want everyone to also remember, and this is some stuff that I think Abel and I will both, we will agree on 1,000%. You can get education about these subjects that Abel and I have talked about a lot today on Microsoft Learn. And there's a specific module all around Agile approach to software development. And I feel like this is one of your key ways as a user to kind of get a lot of this information, take it in, and gamify it. You'll be able to answer the questions. You'll be able to learn all these. You'll learn about a lot of these subjects we've talked about. And I think this is really a great one, is just how to start practicing, if you will. And I think that, like I said, I'm someone that I learn by doing. And so, the idea that we get some tools and some tricks and some things that we can just do right in our Azure DevOps space, along with some free assistance, is really cool to me. Cool. So Abel, we've got about 5 minutes left. And I'd love you to kind of just, once more, just sell me, why are we doing this? What's the big why?
Why Agile? Plain and simple, because Waterfall does not work. right? 90% of waterfall projects fail. By failing, they go over budget, over time. We end up with software with way too many bugs. We end up with software, the end user gets it, and it's not what they want, right? So clearly, if it doesn't work, there needs to be a better process. And that process is Agile, right? So let me link Agile and DevOps really, really quickly before we leave, because DevOps really is the buzzword today, right? What that people are always talking about. What is DevOps, right? DevOps, the main principle of DevOps is we want to continuously deliver value. Why do we want to continuously deliver value? Because the speed of business is so crazy fast. This is the only way dev teams can keep up and innovate fast enough, is by adopting DevOps best practices. A buddy of mine once told me that DevOps is the second decade of Agile. So what that really means is you cannot have DevOps if you're a software shop. We're talking purely software now. You cannot have DevOps until you have Agile, right? Why is Agile important? That's why.
So I love this page, and I shared it up on the in the chat. It's the DevOps versus Agile page. I think it's really super useful. And so let's. I'm just going to read you some definitions, everybody, before we get going, and just to kind of put this all in the basket. What's DevOps? Well, DevOps is the software development practice that brings people, process, technology together to deliver continuous value. And we all know who said that and why it's important. It's Donovan. He gave us this idea of why the whole concept of DevOps is so important. But Agile is just a delivery approach. It's how we accomplish. So DevOps brings in a number of different methods: CI/CD, Agile, Scrum, all these different things. The planning, DevOps uses these tools, uses these processes, uses these methodologies in order to accomplish its main goal. But Agile in itself is its own animal. Am I right by saying that? It's its own entire animal outside of DevOps?
Yeah, again, you cannot have DevOps without Agile, again, for software. You can't, right? Because you can't continuously deliver value unless you're building software in an iterative fashion where you can actually have a shippable unit sprint after sprint after sprint. So it's pretty simple.
I love these two manifestations that you can find on this page. You know, DevOps is about continuous integration, continuous delivery, and deployment. Agile manifestations are Scrum, Kanban, lean development, DSDM, extreme programming, Crystal, and then feature-driven development. All super, I guess what you would call advanced concepts that go beyond just the whole throw it over the wall thing that we saw for so long with Waterfall. Well, hey, Abel, we are in our last few minutes. And so I know I mentioned that you've got some stuff going on, and I'd love to hear about what Abel's immediate future of events and stuff look like.
The most important thing is Ignite is coming up, right? Ignite is one of our first party events. This is going to be fantastic. It's going to be at the end of February. You don't want to miss it. So that's a huge thing on my calendar these days, is prepping for Ignite.
So you can start your Ignite journey by going to myignite.microsoft.com. I'll put it in the chat. And that's where you can sign up and get ready to take part. It's all virtual. It's all free. And it's going to be super useful. I always love Ignite. I miss us all going to one place. But right now, that's not the best idea. But what are we going to do? Hey, Abel. Thank you so much for being part of this conversation. We did things a little bit differently than we normally do on the show. No demos, mostly just a big conversation. But I think that the ideas, the concepts that you helped me hit, it helped expand my knowledge. So thank you very much.
Dude, thank you so much for having me. This was awesome.
Awesome. So everyone, as a reminder, we will be back next week. And next week, I'm going to talk to someone real cool, Abel. Mark Brown. Mark Brown works on the Cosmos DB team. He's going to tell me all about the new features that are coming out or have come out in Cosmos. And I know that they even have their own little mini conference coming up. So we'll be able to hear a little bit about that. There's so much going on around Azure. And I'm always happy to kind of deliver some new info. And that's that. So, hey, Abel, thank you so much. Let's give everybody a big goodbye. What do you say?
Yeah, sounds good.
See you later, everybody. Rock on. We'll catch you next time. Same cloud time, same cloud channel. Bye-bye.